Resident Evil 7 came out 2, 3 weeks ago, and I've finally got around to beating it. I haven't been feeling very well, I'm a little sick, but I finally got around to beating it the other day, and I have no intention of making like a full written review for it, but I think it is a game that is very much worth talking about even if I don't do a full review for it. So before I can even begin to talk about the game, I think you do need to know some background of where the Resident Evil games are, where Resident Evil is as a franchise. And I don't mean in terms of a story, I mean in terms of where does like its spirit, its soul lie as a franchise. So you have Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, there's a few games in between, but 1, 2, and 3, the main Resident Evil games, I have not played them, by the way. They were, Hallmark games, they were Hallmark horror games. They had a very specific feel to them. They were very survival horror, limited ammo. They were scary games. And then the game does like the series, not the game. The series takes a huge shift when you get to Resident Evil 4, which is I think the Resident Evil game that most people know, which is kind of ironic because it's not very representative of the actual franchise. Now, Resident Evil 4, I really love that game, and I think you'll have a hard time finding anyone who doesn't, but it's a big change for the series. So up till that point, the series was this survival horror franchise where you scrounge for bullets, you're stuck in largely one location, very scary game. In Resident Evil 4, it does have horror elements, but for all intents and purposes, Resident Evil 4 was like an action game, like a third-person action game. And after that huge success, the franchise just went fucking crazy. They started releasing all kinds of spin-off games, most of which weren't good except for the Revelations games, which I'll get to later. Those didn't come until much later. But after Resident Evil 4, you get two spin-off games, and then you get Resident Evil 5, which I've also played Resident Evil 5, and this game was on Xbox 360, PS3. So this game was even more of a drastic departure from the kind of series roots than 4 was. It took it to its extremes in terms of the action. You still stopped and aimed when you shoot things, but it was just pure action game. Pretty much no horror elements. Now, this game is kind of hated. It's one of my, I guess, guilty pleasures, but it's only a guilty pleasure because it's actually a decent game, just maybe it shouldn't be called Resident Evil 5. So needless to say, though, this game was not, Resident Evil 5, that is, was not well received. Most people didn't play this game. I don't think it sold very well. And then you get even more deluge of spin-off games. One of those being Revelations on the 3DS, which was a cool game in 2012. It kind of took the series back to its roots and shit, but it was on the 3DS, so it wasn't like the biggest, hottest seller. Then you get Resident Evil 6 in 2012 as well. This game I did not play, but it was a catastrophic failure. Just, my god. If Resident Evil 4 was, taking it in action direction, and Resident Evil 5 was sticking with an action direction, taking it even further, Resident Evil 6 was like a Michael Bay Transformers movie. I mean, this shit was fucking ridiculous. You had these huge fucking battles. It was just a bad game, too, but just huge. It was so far removed from the Resident Evil core roots that if you didn't see a Leon in the game, it's like unrecognizable as Resident Evil. So then enters this game, Resident Evil 7. Now this is, I don't think you will see a more jarring, game, like a more jarring sequel than going from 6 to 7. Resident Evil 7, on first glance, you might look at it and think PT, you might think Outlast, and you're partially correct. Because while you might look at this game and think, wow, this is a huge drastic shift, it's first person, it's largely more traditional, like just horror-wise, it actually ends up being, even though it's changed perspectives from third person to first person, it is more faithful to the roots of the Resident Evil franchise than like any game since the first 3. So back to kind of comparing this to another game, PT, the teaser for the Hideo Kojima Silent Hills game that never came to be. Now, I loved PT. I think it's a brilliant little demo. But in terms of similarities, there's the similarity in that you're walking through this house. And now, I don't want to ruin... I'm not going to spoil this game for you at all, but if you don't want to hear anything about the game, I'm not the guy you want to listen to. So the first like hour, the opening act, the prologue of Resident Evil 7, it is very PT-ish. You're kind of in this guest house walking through. You don't have much of a way of defending yourself. It's kind of like walking through a house of horrors at a Halloween exhibit. But the big difference between PT and Resident Evil 7 is the tone of the horror. So PT, I feel like when Silent Hills would finally, if it were to have come to fruition, it would have been this game that you'd see like a big university like chalkboard, like lecture hall chalkboard with like all these calculations and mathematics all over it to come to the conclusion of what the story meant. It was a very cerebral game. It was a heady game. It was a kind of rooted in sci-fi, rooted in theoretical physics. That's at least how I interpreted it. Parallel universes, kind of explaining the hauntings. And that's the big difference. That game was haunted. That little house in PT was fucking haunted. Resident Evil 7 there's no ghosts in this game. There's no poltergeists. There's no evil spirits. It's not like that. Instead, with Resident Evil 7, while you will be scared to walk around, it is a scary game, it's not the looming threat of like a ghost or a spirit coming at you. That's not what this game is about. It's Resident Evil, so you've got people that are infected with a virus. And this game is just like PT. It's very good at it. There's, PT had a few jump scares, you could call them jump scares, but they weren't done in kind of a tacky way. They were done in a, genuinely scary, well done way. The best way I can think of it is, if you think of Outlast, which was a decent game, but it was definitely like a corny indie game, low budget. It reeked of the kind of cheese that you would see on a sci-fi channel horror movie made for TV. These two games, Resident Evil and PT, are not like that. They've got a high level of... Now, Resident Evil 7, it's a little bit kooky, but it has like a high level of fit and finish where it doesn't feel like cheesy or shitty, or like it's, you can see the seams or you can see the man behind the curtain. So after this is where this game differs greatly from Outlast or PT. After the first 45 minutes to an hour, the prologue opening sequence of this game, it opens the fuck up. You realize you're not just going to spend 8 hours walking around the halls having things jump out and spring out at you. This is like a real full-fledged game. It's probably the game that you could probably most compare this to is Alien Isolation, but I think it's even more playable than that game in a lot of regards. There's more shooting, there's more combat. It's a real like game, and I know that sounds like a silly thing to say, but when you look at this, you think that, well, it's just the kind of game that you're going to get scared and walk through the halls. It's such a brilliant combination of being that, but also being a real fleshed out game that's satisfying to play. You have you have like 4 guns in this game, and the ammo is scarce, but it's not to the point where, and the ammo's scarce, but it's not to the point where like Alien Isolation, where there's so few bullets, and when you use them, it's like to distract someone. No, you actually fight shit in this game, and you use those shots to get kills. The kind of enemies, the mobs in this game are called the Molded. They are genuinely creepy. They're genuinely unsettling. There's this music that plays. It's not even music. It's like sound design type shit that plays in the background when you're fighting them. It's very creepy. The way they move is so convincing, and I guess that brings me into the graphics a little bit. So this game, if I'm going to be honest, when I first started the game, you start out outside of the Baker Manor and during daytime. I thought that, my game had defaulted to the lowest settings and like 480p. No, the textures just don't look good, and they're very low resolution textures. This game does end up looking good though, and it's not because of the textures. It's because of all these post-processing effects. It's because the game, much like PT, although I think PT actually had better textures than this game, both of these games are made to be in these dark hallways, so it makes sense that putting it outside is not the best look for it, but that begs the question, why would you start the game outside during the daytime? Whatever. So you get outside, you look at these textures, you zoom in on them, they're not great. But once you get inside, you get these like really unbelievable like effects, visual effects. There's got to be like 20 filters on this game with the fucking effects. and certain details look really like creepily lifelike in these dark scenarios. Things like the face of your wife, your in-game wife. When you see her walking around, it's like very convincing looking. Her skin tones look good. The hair looks good. When you see your own character's hands, the skin really looks soft and realistic, and you can see kind of the blue of his veins coming through his skin. It's unbelievable looking. Now, the reason I think that they made the textures, that concession with the textures, was probably almost 100% due in part to the fact that this game is targeting 60 FPS on console, and it's targeting 60 FPS on console because this is a full-fledged PSVR game on PlayStation 4. Now, this game, if there ever was a game worth playing on, I know I'm a huge critic of VR, but I can see this game being decent on VR, but at 60 frames, I feel like you might get a little sick still. Now, for me, the real unique thing about this game, what it does that I haven't seen in another game, is that it empowers you and then takes away that power without, taking your gun away or anything. So you'll be in this game, and unlike an Outlast, unlike a PT, or unlike even an Alien Isolation, you're not hiding from shit in this game for the most part. You're getting out there, you're fighting, you're killing things. And since this is a survival horror game, ammo is scarce, but it's not so scarce that like you never have, more than, or you never have like a full clip of ammo. You'll get enough to actually fight things. So what this game will do is pump you up with ammo, pump you up with weapons, and you'll feel not scared anymore. You'll feel as if you can take on whatever awaits. And then you'll have like the first phase of a boss fight, and you'll defeat someone. And then you think, oh man, I've really conquered this game. I'm not scared anymore. Now it's just an action game. And then literally 5 minutes later, it'll plop you into a scenario without taking away your weapons, without making the game harder. It'll just present you with an environment that's so creepy and unsettling and uncomfortable that you feel powerless again. It's incredible. And really, that's the highlight of this game, is that it can balance so many. There's a lot of elements in this game, and it balances them all. There were so many opportunities that this game could have fallen flat on its face, and it never does. There could have been a sequence towards the end of the game where, you fight 100 of the molded things, and you have like a chain gun with unlimited ammo. It never does that, not even once. There's not even a sequence like in The Last of Us. There was this sequence where Joel kind of gets chained up to a ceiling, and you have unlimited handgun ammo, and you fight like 100 zombies at once, and you keep shooting ammo. It doesn't affect your ammo reserves. And that is like, The Last of Us is pretty convincing in terms of being survival horror, in terms of being limited with its ammo. But even that game, had that moment, right? This game never has that moment, not once. I have only two things that I would critique about this game, and neither of them are even close to being deal breakers. So the first one would be the enemy AI, and when I say the enemy AI, I specifically mean kind of the big characters, not the normal characters, like the boss characters. That's who I'm talking about here. When you're fighting the father, it's not so much of an issue, because you get these parts that are like Outlast, where you're in a room and you've got the boss enemy kind of doing the rounds in this area, doing the rounds. And if you don't want to get in their way because they'll fuck you up and you have no way of fighting them, you can stun them and get away from them, but you're not going to fight them. Now the father, if you get up enough courage, you can start running around, and you realize that they can't really do that much to you. Now this isn't so much of a problem with the father, because if you try to run past him in a tight corridor, he actually grabs you and stuff. So he's a little more threatening, and you'll get slammed and punished for trying to run around and ignore him. But when it comes to the mother character, she doesn't grab you. She has like a lantern, and she shoots insects at you, and it's a completely ranged attack. Doesn't stun you or anything like that. So if you see her walking down the hallway that you want to go down, you can literally just run right past her. And I feel like most people aren't even going to try that because they'll be like kind of scared of what might happen to them. But that's one thing I observed, that you can kind of ignore some of the AI, just run right past them. The other critique of this game would be the length. And I'm going to go look at my Steam right now, see how long it took me to beat Resident Evil 7. Yeah, so it took me between over 7 hours but less than 8, so like something like 7.2 hours, 7.5 hours maybe. And that's on the short side, if we're going to be honest here. That's the other critique. Now, I felt satisfied by the time I was done playing, and I feel like I play games, usually when I look at what the average time to beat a game is, I'm like pretty beneath that. And I'm not speed running the games. I'm efficient when I play the games. I'm not like I'm not sitting around not knowing where to go, you know? So that kind of cuts down a lot of playtime for me. But nonetheless, it did feel like there could have been one more area or one more member of the Baker family to kind of deal with when you're on the estate. And I still feel this way even after beating the game, because I'm not going to ruin the game for you, by the way, but after you kind of beat the Baker family estate, kind of the main game, there's a really, really long epilogue. And this epilogue, it goes on and on and on. It's probably the best part of the game, to be honest. But this epilogue goes on and on and on, and I liked that, and it was a good ending, and it bulked up the game a lot in terms of playtime. But still, even after playing that, I thought, well, I really would have liked to have one more area on the estate, maybe one more family member. But that's really all I can critique about this game. This game was excellent. I had such a blast playing it, and since I wasn't planning on doing like a written review for it, I didn't play it like, you know, all in one weekend or something like that. I played this in bits and pieces and really enjoyed myself and savored the experience. And because of that, it made the game, since I played the game over a longer period of time, I think it's sticking with me more than if I would have just burst played it. Because this game really, it's more reminiscent for me, like in terms of playing it, it felt almost like a Dark Souls game, and I feel like I compare everything to Dark Souls, but really this game does have that kind of format. It's a linear game, sure, but the areas are open. It never takes control away from you, and you've got these little safe rooms, and you unlock shortcuts to get to the safe rooms, and you know, you'll do a run, and then damn, I need to get back to that safe room and save. This game even manages to connect itself to the core Resident Evil franchise at the end of the game, which I won't ruin for you, but it's a great moment. I definitely recommend this game. I haven't seen too much talk of it, because the first week when it came out, of course you get the media onslaught because this is like one of the first big games of the year, but you know, I kind of gauge it by how many people I know that are playing it, how many people I know that are interested in playing it, and then just kind of going on websites like Twitter or whatever forums you go on, and you just kind of see people talking about the game, talking about wanting to get the game or just being curious about it, and I have not seen much. I only know one person who bought the game, and I don't know anyone else who's been like, hey, is this game good? But I can definitely recommend this game to you. It's like 8.5, maybe 9 out of 10 quality game. It's really shockingly good.